I don't know if you've claimed your $100 worth of free vouchers, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with how everything's going. So anyway, we'll give it another sort of 20 seconds and then we'll kick this thing off.
All right, sounds good. I'll sit here patiently.
Yeah, just looking good. Awesome. Okay, we'll kick this off. So, hey everyone, my name's Alex Grundy and I'm the Digital Marketing Manager here at JobAdder. Thanks so much for joining us today, and I'm super excited to host a webinar, 7 ways automation can generate more value from your database. So, topics we'll be covering, some include generating new candidate and client leads, bringing your database to life with activity and insights, automating candidate sourcing and nurturing process, protect your business with compliance-based automation. So I'll be hosting today's session with our speaker, Chris South, CEO of Roy AI, R-O-I-A-I, Roy AI. And so Chris, could you just please introduce yourself?
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure. And before I do, thank you very much to yourself and the whole JobAdder team for organising this. It's been a very painless process getting to this point compared with other webinars I've been involved in. So yeah, as background, so I was a recruiter for a number of years, and then 5 or 6 years ago, made the leap and set up a marketing agency where we service the recruitment industry. That business is called Prominence. And then go sort of on a few more years, sort of let's say 3 or 4 years ago from now, we started to bump into this this issue that we wanted to utilize marketing automation in the work we were doing, automation to the marketing efforts we were carrying out. But we were finding it very, very hard to do this. There were a lot of reasons for it, but the primary one is there was no marketing automation platform that works directly with JobAdder. So we were using a lot of third-party tools to make things work. And we got to a position a couple of years ago now where we sort of sat down and went, there's got to be a better way. We know in other sectors there's things like HubSpot, Marketo, that companies use to automate their marketing, but there was just nothing in our sector. So that's when Roy AI was set up. And for the last 18 months or so, we've been hard at work developing this with a view to going live in May. So it's taken a long while to get to where we are, but that's because it's a really big beast to tackle. But yeah, here we are, and really looking forward to talking about all things, not just marketing automation, but automation in general.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for the introduction. And I think, Chris, you're a bit of a regular on these webinars, so I've seen a few before coming on at JobAdder. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just a reminder, if you have any questions, just pop them in the question side, the Q&A box, and then we'll answer them as we go along. Otherwise, we'll be opening up the floor at the end to answer some questions at the end of the session. So let's kick things off. So I thought we'd start as the topic of automation. It's fairly broad. So Chris, could you please sort of provide just a high-level overview of how automation works in recruitment?
Would love to. Okay, before we go too far in this, Alex, just obviously we're catering to a really broad audience here. There'll be people that have used automation a lot. There'll be people that have got absolutely no idea what we're talking about. So I've taken it down to the most basic level I can here to really explain the fundamentals behind automation. As we go through this webinar, we'll be looking at specific use cases, but at the moment we're just talking about the theory behind it. So automation is built almost exclusively around triggers, and hopefully I'm looking at the right side here, but that left-hand column are triggers. And triggers are things that cause something else to happen, right? So predominantly we're talking JobAdder here. So let's say, for example, a record changes. That could be a trigger. It could be that something is a certain age old. For example, a CV is 20 days old. That could be a trigger. It could be that a candidate goes for a job interview. It could be they have their references taken. Any of those things. But then also off JobAdder, it could be that someone engages with a piece of marketing content, an email or a text. They complete a survey, engage with a chatbot, visit the website. There's lots and lots of different things that fit that early stage. When we're building automations, we can use one trigger or we can use a combination of triggers. So we could use any of those things I've just mentioned in combination with one another. What is next is that an action automatically happens. Now, I know you know this stuff, but that could be the end, right? You could have a trigger, you could have an action, it's closed. So as an example, if a candidate applies to a job, That's your trigger. The action could be to change their status on JobAdder to be active. Seems pretty logical, right? And that way your recruitment team, when they're looking at their candidate database, they can immediately see who's active and non-active. And I'll talk about how we can make people non-active later on. Normally, there's more involved in an automation than a simple trigger action. Normally, you will end up with either an action and another action, or an action and some form of communication with candidates or client audiences. So the communication, it can be via email, text, WhatsApp, can include surveys, chatbots, or so you send an email with a link to a chatbot or a survey, send a text with the same thing, or a WhatsApp message for the same thing. Yeah. From there, the data that comes back from that communication, the action could be update the record in JobAdder. So as an example, you've sent them a survey, they've completed the survey, you put the results of the survey in JobAdder, or you change a field in JobAdder. You could also then have another action and another action, another action, and it goes on and on and on. The big difference on that right-hand column there is we can then split what happens. So as an example, if we sent a survey and someone gives a 10 out of 10, we can say everyone that gives us a 10 out of 10 should go in this route, and everyone that gives 9 or less goes in this route, or everyone that doesn't respond goes in this route. So it's a way of splitting people based on their behaviors and then pushing them into different parts of the automation. But it's all designed to use the triggers to get people to then engage with whatever you're asking them to do, and then push that information back into JobAdder, and then critically, if needed, to alert the recruiter and say, hey, this thing has happened.
Sure.
That's kind of the
Great. And yeah, so I think some of our audience that would be familiar with how Zapier works. So it's fairly similar in terms of the triggers and actions and everything. And I think there would be a lot of us, myself included, at previous organizations who would have these quite beastly automation systems, but you find that they're kind of not integrated with your database or CRM system like a JobAdder. So now you're kind of using 2 data points. And so the great thing obviously about this is that everything you're talking about is using JobAdder data changes and putting everything back into JobAdder and updating those records. But I guess oops, sorry.
I was going to say, yeah, it's exactly that. What we're trying to do is just level the playing field a little bit, because the big agencies out there, the internationals, they've been using marketing automation for a long while. Some of the larger organizations are doing exactly what you're talking about. They're using Zapier to connect to MailChimp or ActiveCampaign to try and push things backwards and forwards between JobAdder. But because of the complexity of getting those things set up, there's a full-time job involved in it. You've got to maintain it, and it's just hard and long-winded. So we're trying to eradicate all that complexity in the middle by having that direct integration, which is exactly what you said.
Yeah, brilliant. Now I know there'll be a few people out there that are sort of quietly cautious of automation. Anytime that word's thrown around, they're kind of just a little bit sort of pushed a little bit to the side. So just to confirm, so Roy AI, it's not trying to replace any of the core communication that recruiters are doing at the moment.
Yeah, definitely not. My belief is automation should be used to enable recruiters to do what they do better. So there's lots of different ways as we go through this that, depending on how your agency operates, you can configure automations to do different things. But it's always my preference to use the automations to prompt and remind and alert recruiters to do things, rather than trying to automate too much happening instead of them actually doing it themselves.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so we'll start on to the themes of today. So improving customer experience. I think we've got so just I guess one of the big perceived criticisms within the recruitment industry is the sort of the dreaded poor candidate experience, especially for the unsuccessful candidates. So how can automation sort of help to address these sort of problems?
Yeah, so there's lots that it can do. Is a really simple answer. Before I go into looking at some specifics, though, I just want to talk about customer experience and what we're actually talking about here. I know that sounds like a bit of a silly question, but again, we're speaking to a really broad spectrum of people. And for me, improving customer experience doesn't need to be just monitoring what you're doing and making sure you reject people on time. That's part of it, but it's looking for opportunities where you can make your agency stand out as doing things better. And I just want to talk about an example of where I see customer experience being improved really, really easily with a product that's not really to do with automation, but can be fitted into automation, and that's Calendly. So when we do our demos, people log in and they book an appointment slot to me through Calendly. But historically, if you're a recruiter and you've got a meeting with a client or a candidate, you'd send an email and say, "Hey Alex, I'd love to catch up. Would you be available at 9 a.m. tomorrow?" You'd look at your diary and you go, "No, I'm not available at 9 a.m. How about, could you do 11 a.m. Chris?" And I come back and I go, "Yep, that's fine." And then I have to send an invite. Or, "Sorry mate, I can't do 11. What about 1? And, is that backwards, forwards, yo-yo?
Yeah.
It's a waste of everyone's time. A far more efficient way is to send them an email and say, "Hey, could you book a time into my diary tomorrow or Wednesday? Here's my availability." And they just click a link and it adds to both your diaries. It's a really smooth process. The reason I'm talking about that, and I know that's not to do with AI and the automation side of things, is it's so simple to do. But that level of customer experience is what we expect in lots of other sectors, but not necessarily in recruitment. By implementing something like that, it enables your business to stand out. So I'm going to actually, as well as talking about the things you mentioned in customer experience, talk about how we can provide opportunities for positive experience that are just those little extra bits of value add that will make your agency stand out. Okay, so you mentioned job applications. The big thing is obviously knowing how your business is doing from an experience perspective. So this is not a new idea. When I was at Hayes, 10 years ago now, we used to survey our candidates and clients and find out how we did. And I remember vividly that you get a little certificate at the end of the month every time you got a 10 out of 10 from a candidate or client. Yeah. And that was a process that was built into the back end at Hayes. Whether it was automated or not, I'm not quite sure, but it's been around for ages. We get it in, you buy a car, you get a survey. Not that I buy cars every day. How was your experience? Blah, blah, blah. So using automation, we can do exactly that in recruitment. On the screen here, you've actually got an automation running effectively. So the bigger box there, that's a trigger. So I've already mentioned what a trigger is, but this specific trigger is based on a placement happening. So what we're saying is 5 days after a placement has been made, we want to send an email to this candidate. We can also do one to send to the client. Candidate gets an email saying, "Hey, how did we do? Please click here." They go through to this chatbot, which is actually more of a conversational form, but that's semantics. And they then provide their feedback. That chatbot can have whatever questions you wish in it. A simple NPS 0 to 10, but it can also say, how well did the recruiter understand the brief? How was their communication skills? All that stuff. And when the candidate completes that survey, that information goes back and is logged in JobAdder. And also there can be an alert set, so it alerts the recruiter or the manager and says, "Hey, this person has given you feedback." You could also tie another action onto the end that says, well, you can split it with an if else. If someone gives us a 9 or a 10, then immediately send them an email saying, "Hey, would you leave us a review on Google?" So there's lots of different ways you can do that, and you can get more complex depending on how far you want to drill down. You could do a survey every time a candidate has an internal interview, or every time a client has an external interview. Like, how you could ask, how was that candidate? You can actually run some of your recruitment processes through it. So basically, any part of the recruitment process within JobAdder can be used as a trigger to send out surveys in one form or another.
Yeah, brilliant. You're talking about NPS for anyone who's sort of a little bit more on the technical scale of things.
Yeah, exactly that. NPS at the top level, how would you recommend this company? And then the other questions coupled in below that. If we could have the next slide. Oh, beautiful. So that's understanding how your business is performing, and hopefully the feedback enables you to implement changes. But obviously we want to also use automation to provide a better experience. The one you mentioned was the job application side of things. In my experience, this is responsible for a huge percentage of the negative feedback we get as an industry, because we're really good at helping the candidates we can help. The candidates we can't help, they just fall off into the ether and don't generally hear much. JobAdder, as you know, has functionality to reject a candidate. My experience is that recruiters often forget to do that. So, you might have a job that's taken a while to fill, but you've got activity happening, but a candidate applied a month ago and they've heard nothing because that rejection hasn't been processed. Or worse, the job gets closed, but the candidates don't get rejected. So, really poor customer experience. There's lots of different ways you can overcome this with automation. And I'm just going to say this point again, just to avoid people being concerned with how an automation may or may not fit to their business. I'm going to talk through several different ways that this can be done. One might suit you, one you might think I'm never going to implement that for my business, but I'm just showing you all the options that exist. So what we've got on the screen here is one example of how you could use automation to improve this. So it's a little blurry, but you see how it says the job application was more than 10 days ago. So the automation would fire on day 10 after the job application, plus there has been no activity on the candidate. So there I'm talking the candidate note, there's been no phone call, no email, they haven't had an internal interview, they haven't had a client interview, job offer. You're basically removing everything that would show they are actively involved in that job. And at that point, the system would then send an email saying, hey, Mr. Candidate, we're really sorry. Unfortunately, in this example, we haven't been able to help you. However, click here to look at more vacancies, whatever that message is that you wish to send them, and change their status so that that side of things is sorted out. If that one isn't right for you, you could configure it differently. And you could have it that every time a job is closed on JobAdder, the candidates are automatically rejected. Obviously, again, the ones that are active or have been placed, that side of things. Another example that actually there's two things there. If you're a little bit more cautious and you don't want automatic rejections, you could set it so that if a candidate hasn't been rejected, the recruiter is alerted to the process of rejection themselves. Again, that may or may not be right for you. Another example I heard of is the star rating on JobAdder. The 1 to 5 star rating of a candidate?
Yeah.
So you could set an automation that if an applicant applies, the automation waits a couple of days, and then if the candidate is already a 2-star or a 1-star, let's say 2 or less, they're automatically rejected. So it's avoiding him to look at the same candidate again and again and again because the system's processed it for you. For some agencies, that's just going to be completely wrong. For others, that's going to be a massive time saver. Again, it just depends on how you actually want to use these things.
And I assume conversely, if you've got a 5-star, you might set up a notification alerting a channel or a group email or something saying, listen, we've just got the rock star who's applied now. Let's jump onto that one, sort of thing, or they've landed on the website, sort of thing.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that one, but that's a brilliant idea. It could be someone from 4 years ago who's a 5-star who's now come back in. Hey, do something with this candidate.
Yeah, great.
And that's the great thing you're talking about there, because you're moving into positive messaging land. At the moment, we're talking about rejection and monitoring service, and that's all well and good, but I far prefer the positive angles. So continuing that theme that you started, my absolute favorite automation is get all your temps and contractors into a bucket or an audience, and on their birthday or just before their birthday, send a notification to their recruiter or their manager and say, hey, this temp's birthday is coming up. It gives you an opportunity to maybe send a little package out to them, or a very worst case, send a nice email saying, hey, happy birthday. If you didn't want to do that, but you still wanted the same sort of experience, you could actually set an automation. So on that person's birthday, a pre-written email goes out saying, hey, happy birthday. We really appreciate having you. The fact you've worked with us for however many years they've worked with you on the system. Most agencies are not doing that stuff. And it's the sort of thing that's going to stick in their mind and go, oh, that agency, remembered my birthday, that sort of messaging. Other one from a customer experience is aftercare. I know when I was recruiting, I was dreadful at remembering aftercare. You should remember it. You should remember it. You know the reasons you should remember it, but you don't. So you could set up an automation that says, hey, Mr. Recruiter, your 30-day aftercare with XYZ candidate is due. You could also set up an automation, depending on how your business is set, that sends an email to the candidate saying, hi, Mr. Candidate, you've been working at XYZ for 30 days, how are you getting on? And then it links to a chatbot or a survey for them to respond to. That information is then pushed back to JobAdder, the recruiter notified, or you could just have the recruiter notified if the feedback's bad, as an example. Again, depends on how you want to run it, but it just ensures things like that aren't forgotten and disappearing in the background.
Yeah, I guess the thing that really hits with me is the flexibility of the system in terms of, I know from previous experience being agency side, I would be stringing a lot of zaps together from Zapier, especially one of the big ones was always sending off our candidate gifts at the end of the month. We'd be sending off, sort of a few days after placement's been made, send candidate gift, and I'd be stringing a lot of these Zapiers together. And just the maintenance on these zaps were going along, sending another zap to a zap to a zap, then to send the zap back into JobAdder to say the actual candidate gift has arrived. It's just nice having the flexibility of having it just all in one system, and then also updating JobAdder and not having someone to have to manually go over. You also have to kind of think about the maintenance of those zaps that you're doing, and then you're transferring those to another person's account. So I can definitely see the flexibility of it. Just theme number 3, so generating new candidate and client leads. We'll push over to so I'm sure most of the audience is incredibly interested in this one. This is the sort of, I guess, the crux of the issue that comes down to. So I imagine this is where we're talking sort of about marketing automation, what most people would be familiar with in terms of automation.
Yeah, exactly right. And thank you very much for the last idea in terms of candidate gifts, as well as another one I'm going to write out because I hadn't thought of that. But it will definitely do that. Yeah, this is exactly it. So this is where the frustration was for me, and I know speaking to you about your previous roles, some of the frustration for you is I know how marketing automation works. I know the theory behind it, but it's so hard to do at the moment using Zapier and that side of stuff. So that was the inspiration for Roy AI in the first place was, right, we are going to solve this problem, which is trying to use the data that sits on JobAdder to better value, to better use. Because at the moment, even if I go back to when I was recruiting, the main source of candidates is job boards. The main source of client leads is BD. I mean, there's a few variables in there like referral campaigns and things. It's largely still true now, but if we can utilize the data that's on the database, it adds a really, really strong alternative to those two for both candidate and client leads. So I'm going to talk through lots of little bits in terms of how marketing automation can help with marketing campaigns to candidate and client audiences. One of the big ones is around getting candidates to update their details. But before we talk about that, segmentation. Like you as a marketer, you know that the more targeted you can be with your content, the better the engagement and response that you get, right?
Sure.
From my side in the marketing agency world, we've always found that the best we can do is really a client list and a candidate list out of JobAdder. What we want to do is we want to be able to target inactive clients with one message, active clients with another message, candidates who are project managers with this. And to be fair, we could do it in JobAdder. The challenge was trying to link it into another platform. So segmentation can be done using triggers. So the trigger you can see on my right here is one that is designed to find clients that aren't active. They haven't had any activity on their profile. So we might send them a campaign to try and re-engage them with something. So the first part of the trigger is the Roy activity score, Roy AI activity score. I'm going to talk about this in a little while, so I'll come back to that one. The second part saying we want clients that haven't had a phone call or an email in the last 26 weeks, so 6 months. So we can make the assumption with those two that those clients haven't really been contacted by our business, so are worth putting in an inactive marketing campaign where we try and nurture them back to active or promote, a salary survey or featured candidates or something to them. That can be done across candidate and client records as well. And we can also, the JobAdder folders can also be used as part of that. So you could say they belong to this JobAdder folder and then apply the time frame on it. So it could be a sort of coupled trigger. Everything that happens on these can be tracked. So if an email sent and a client opens that email, and let's say we've sent a client, did you used to do these ones where you send an email with, you know, a couple of profiles of candidates that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, yeah, we would do both hot jobs and hot candidates. So either to clients or to candidates.
Yeah, so you could do on both, to be honest. But on the client side, if you know clients are less likely to click, so if you do get a client that clicks on a featured candidate, they're even less likely to inquire about that candidate. But by the very nature they've clicked it means they're probably thinking about hiring. So you could then set up an alert based on that to alert the relevant recruiter saying, hey, this client's clicked on this link, could be worth following up with. It just gives some insights into what's actually going on. And the other big thing is the ability to resend a campaign. So marketing teams generally spend a long time building marketing campaigns. It's sent to a list and they move on to the next job because that's all the functionality we had. What marketing automation, what AI can do is you can send it once and then you can delay and then you can split the list. So anyone that opened it goes into completed. Anyone that didn't open stays in the funnel. And then they resent it, excuse me, with perhaps a different subject line or a different from email address, maybe a week later, because there's another opportunity they might engage with the content that they missed the first time around. So you're really trying to maximize the value that you're getting out of the marketing content you're doing. Okay, so this one is I guess the big one from, if I were to sort of count the amount of times I speak to someone who asks about this, it would be absolutely by far and along ahead of everything else that people are interested in. And that is trying to get the hundreds of thousands of candidates you've got on your database so that they're relevant and you've actually got up-to-date information. Because at the moment, if someone applies, they go in the database, unless you speak to them or have an email conversation, or maybe they go on the website and update their details, which is pretty unlikely, that data becomes dormant very, very quickly. What we're talking about here is automations that can run in the background, or they can run manually, i.e. you can just send them to a small group of candidates or to one candidate if you just want one candidate to update their details. That encourages someone to provide your details that then automatically go into JobAdder. On the screen there is the trigger that you can use lots of different triggers, but the trigger I've put together is that we want to target candidates that we haven't placed, we haven't registered as wanting to delete. Their CV is more than 6 months old, and they haven't had any activity, so they've had no phone call, email activity, any of that sort of stuff happen on their file. So that's the audience that we've built, basically people that have had no contact with the business for 6 months, and then we want to send them a campaign. So if we flick onto the next slide, please. Brilliant. You see there's a video running in the right-hand side. I'll let you know when it gets to the right point because it's just got to flick through. But effectively, off the back of that trigger, so now the trigger fires, and then what it's going to do is it's going to send them an email. The email says, hey, could you update their details? Then click on update the details, and then it then goes to a chatbot, a conversational form, where it asks them, where do you currently live? What's your current job title? Are you interested in work, in job opportunities at the moment? Yes, no, and if they go through what's the job you're looking for, what's the rate you're looking for, that information is then populated into JobAdder, and the relevant recruiter can be alerted they've completed or updated their details. Their status can be changed on JobAdder. You can change whatever you wish off the back of that actually occurring. So again, you could have that on cycle to older candidates on the database to constantly be updating. But if your recruiter's running a project and they've found 10 people they want to contact, they could send that automation off as a one hit to that group to try and get them to respond back. The challenge with this type of automation is that the people that respond are generally the active candidates. Those that aren't active, yeah, they're not particularly motivated to respond. So I guess the automation, the engine's there, but you've got to be a bit creative in terms of how to get those people to come back, and it is possible. One of my favorites is, go on.
Oh, sorry. I guess, I mean, taking it a step back, if you're generating these lists anyway, you can then generate those lists and then put the onus back onto onto the team to actually contact those people as well. So if you want to take a little bit of a less automated approach, but have the automated of generating the lists, especially for those, as you just mentioned, the passive candidates who aren't really trying to, they're not going to be overly engaged with a lot of this content because they don't have the time. That's where picking up the phone call based on these lists is going to be perfect in a lot of these sense. But I guess it gives you the flexibility of how you ever change these to your business processes of how it's going to work.
Yeah, exactly. Such a good point. So, you know, if at 180 days, you can have it to change their status to inactive, and then you can have an alert going out, or you could add them to a hit list, if you will, of people to call to figure out what their status is. So, yeah, it just depends on the extent you want to automate things. But if you are trying to get people to engage with it, you can set up as a salary survey. So, hey, would you take part in our salary survey? Suddenly they enter their job title, their desired salary, their current salary. You've captured the information without even asking them to update their details straight into the system. You can incentivize them. You can use other types of reports. There's loads of ways of doing it that will actually result in sort of a greater volume of data coming through. But I'm with you. I think I sit somewhere between notifying the recruiters that there's people inactive and the fully automated process, and really allowing recruiters to send these out to select groups of candidates, hyper targeted. That's where you're going to get some of the best results.
Brilliant, brilliant. So do you want to push on to the activity? Yeah, so we'll go. So activity insights then. So what are we talking when we're actually sort of talking about tracking activity here?
So this again is something that's pretty common outside of the recruitment space. But if you look at your database, it's only as live as the information you've got from your phone calls and your emails with your candidates and clients. What Activity Insights does is it just adds another string to the bow and a little bit more information about whether that candidate or client might be active. So the system, Roy AI, can track email opens, links within emails being clicked, email deliverability, surveys being completed, the candidate and client's website activity, and all of those things can then be displayed and show people, hey, this candidate or client has been doing this. And then coupled with that, we have a score. So Roy AI score, and that is an algorithm in the background that basically calculates a score based on the activity we just mentioned. And the more active they are, the higher the score goes. And as their activity decreases, then the score starts dropping back down. But at a glance, you can say, oh, that candidate's an 80, they're probably pretty active. Or they're 20, they might not be that active. You know, it's only going to work if people are engaging with the content or visiting the website, but it's just that little bit more intelligence that you might not have had before.
Effectively lead scoring in how other systems do it as well.
Exactly.
No, it's good. And I was going to ask about the website activity. So Roy AI is tracking website activity as well. So when someone lands on the website, they're cookied obviously for how it goes through and the activities monitored there. One of the key ones that we used to do was same thing. Once someone would be coming on the website, they've obviously placed them into a job. A certain period of time comes back. As soon as the person's come back onto the website after 6 to 12 months, there's no real reason that person's coming back onto the website, back onto a recruiter's website, unless they're starting to look around back on the market. And we found that was good. Just give them a call. Is there a reason they're looking around? It often saves the person either applying for other jobs, but that gives you the flexibility of a lot of these systems that you choose your own adventure. What's going to work for one business doesn't always work for another, and how it goes through.
Yeah, so such a good idea. I mean, that placement one, particularly the first 90 days of a placement, you know, if that candidate's on your website, you've probably got a problem that you need to address. You have a big flashing light alert going out to the recruiter to get on the phone.
Exactly. So we'll go into the next thing, which is automating candidate sourcing. So we all know candidates, they're obviously in high demand. So how can automation help to get hold of them here?
Okay, so I'm tying into some of the things we've already talked about, which is, you know, sending an email, link to a survey to get people to update their details. But I'm talking here for agencies that are probably more executive search orientated. I mean, we're all pretty candidate short. So obviously you're going to be searching through JobAdder, but at a time you're going to be going through other databases like Seek Talent Search as an example, where you're able to find people's details that, you know, there might not be a candidate at that time, but you can probably, or even LinkedIn, you could capture their details on there. And RoyAI has a lead functionality. So again, similar to other marketing products, so you're not just talking clients and candidates, you've got leads. So you can put them in as a lead, because there's no point putting them in a database if you haven't got all their details and that side of things. And then you can fire an automation to go to those leads and try and nurture them to come back to you. So the email could be, "Hey, Mrs. Candidate, I've got an excellent role, really like your profile, would love to speak to you. Here's a link to my calendar. Please book a slot in with me, we'll have a call." Or could you please let me know these few details, and you link directly to a chatbot, and that information comes back to the recruiter. You could do any number of things. The big difference between this and, I've just found a candidate on Seek and I want to, I can send them one email. That's really easy to do. But because of the automation, it can continue sending them an email until they actually engage. So, you're not relying on them opening one. You might catch them at the wrong time. You can send one at 10 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. or one at 5 p.m. and space them out. If it's an urgent role, you can space them out over a week. However, if it's a candidate you just want to add to your talent pool because they're great, you could space it out over a year. You can send them a message now, another one in 6 months, another one in a year, until the time's right. So you've got that working in the background, bringing candidates into the mix for you.
Great. And then shortlisting and internal?
Yeah, so similar thing. Obviously, you can run the same automation on the database on JobAdder. So this is what I'm talking about, where you can send an automation to one person, 10 people, and send it so it sends to them multiple times to get them to come back to you. The big difference here is if they're on JobAdder, you've probably also got their phone number.
Yeah.
And you've got their phone number, you could send them an email. If they don't respond to an email, then you could send them a text message. And we know that text seems to be far better, or is far better at getting a response. So you could have a text message that links to your survey or your chatbot, or just links to your contact details to get them to get back in touch with you. From a shortlisting perspective, this is an example I've actually got from another agency that I know, and I think it's a really, really clever thing they've done. They actually use Zapier for this process, and we really should decide whether it's Zapier or Zapier. I can't make my mind up here. What they do is, when candidates have applied to a job, the recruiter will go through and they'll say, shortlist 5 people or 10 people. They think, hey, they look decent. I want to speak to them, but I want to know a few more details beforehand. And if they've got lots of roles on, they'll chuck those 5 to 10 people into an automation and send them another chatbot that says, hey, you've been shortlisted for this role. In order to progress, we'd like you to answer these 5 or 6 questions. They can be specific to the role, or they could be generic. And that way you get those people are very likely to respond. You get those 5 to 10 candidates all providing that information back to the recruiter, which means they've got far more information from which to make a decision in terms of where to go from there.
Yeah, no, I can see also ticking over now with what we were doing as well. Similar style as well. When you'd be coming in candidate shorts, don't have a lot of time. As soon as we've got them in coming in for a pre-interview, we would Zapier off the pre-registration forms, and that's just a small, tiny little thing. It kind of nicely brings us into the next theme of and the sort of the final theme to today's webinar. So probably not the sexiest of topics, but still super important nonetheless. Compliance-based automation. So can you talk us through these?
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, you talk compliance, it's not particularly sexy. I think just to put it in some context, when you're speaking of the volume of human hours that go into compliance, particularly in the blue collar agencies, making sure that people have the right certificates and tickets, or making sure the right checks are done, all that sort of stuff takes a huge amount of time. So this wasn't where we started with RoyAI. We started in the marketing automation space, and this is automation for a whole different purpose. But the theory is exactly the same. We're using the data in JobAdder as a trigger to either alert someone or take an action. So from a temp perspective, we've already spoken about aftercare. So you can alert someone aftercare needs to happen. You can carry out your aftercare using a check. I actually had an example which would have been ideal for automation probably 8, 9, 10 months ago, right in the middle of the sort of COVID panic. This big blue collar agency had to contact their workforce of thousands every week to check they weren't symptomatic. So that's a huge task, right? Loads and loads of phone calls. What they could have done with automation is just scheduled an automation to go to the whole workforce on a Friday saying, hey, we're just checking in up, like, are you healthy? And if they don't respond, it notifies the team to go and call them. But if they respond, say, yep, I'm fine, that's recorded and it's done. And that could go out via text message. So any sort of one-time uses. It could also go through if you've got a field on JobAdder for the date that a site inspection needs to happen. And if that's due to expire, it can notify the recruiter, hey, you need to go and do a site inspection. It could remind them. Risk management. So similar, again, it depends what fields you've got on there. But let's say you place someone as a temp that's on a visa. It can notify you before the visa is going to expire and say, you need to get this sorted out. Even better, it could notify the candidate and say, hey, your visa is about to expire. Could you upload an up-to-date photocopy of your passport and whatever visa? And that then gets pushed into JobAdder and then notified, and the whole thing sort of taken care of there. Any type of certification paperwork could be done from there. You've then got data compliance, and this, well, an example in this space is, again, I've taken from another agency that I know does this type of thing. But they've had an issue, like I'm sure a lot of recruitment agencies do, where their recruiters carry out an internal interview, either face-to-face or via Zoom or whatever. At that point, they've got all this great information on the candidate that they should be putting into JobAdder. Being recruiters, what we do is we get on the phone to the next person or the client or any other job apart from loading that data into JobAdder, and it's not done. So the JobAdder data just becomes obsolete. You could set a reminder that if an internal interview has happened and whatever core fields you absolutely want to be updated aren't updated, then a reminder goes to the recruiter saying, hey, can you please update these 4 things, click through and update. And it could continue harassing them until they do. I like this automation because if they do their job, they don't get harassed. If they don't do it, they get harassed. So yeah, it might work, might not. And yeah, the last one's really around the hygiene of the system. So the status updates one is, for me, I think where it could be really powerful. A lot of recruiters don't use status from what I've seen, but being able to turn a status to inactive if they haven't been active for 6 months, you know, they've had no, they haven't applied to a job, all that sort of stuff. They haven't got a high ROI score. They go to inactive. But then the minute they apply to a job, they change to active. That way, rather than having a load of statuses that aren't really true or relevant, you can very quickly look at a record and go, ah, that candidate's active, they are actually active, or that candidate's inactive, they're inactive. I can also manage things like unsubscribe and all that sort of stuff through there. My last one is email verification. So if I send you an email and you've changed address, like you've moved company or something like that, normally what happens is nothing, and the system just gets another record that has no use to anyone. So for a candidate, what we could configure an automation. So if an email bounces, it sends a text message saying, hey, your email bounced. Can we get an updated email that links to a chat bot, and then that new email address populates through. I've just thought of this one on the fly, but from a client perspective, if the email bounced, you could actually set a notification to the recruiter saying, hey, this person's probably moved jobs, you want to go in and update the record. So it would work the other way around as well.
Yeah, I guess that brings me up to just the first question that kind of going through here. So I mean, we've even just come up with on the fly examples and we've gone through. So it's similar to Zapier, similar to any marketing automation platform. This like crazy flexible in terms of what you can do, and it's up to your imagination to how it goes. So do you provide any sort of playbooks of best practice automations when actually setting these up?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was the sort of founding fundamentals, if you will, of if we're going to build this product, it has to be easy to use, off the shelf, almost plug and play. Even some of the platforms I've used elsewhere, when you get in there, there's so many different ways to configure things that you can very quickly get lost in the jungle. So everything we've built, I mean, all the automations, with the exception of the ones we've just done on the fly, we've got them built out. We know exactly what should happen when. And then from a recruiter perspective, all that really needs to happen is update it to come from your brand, because you don't want raw AI all over it. Configure the text, because you probably won't want to send exactly what we've written, and you can maybe tweak a parameter or change a field that it syncs to, some minor stuff, and then push go. It's that simple across most of these automations. You just need to know which ones of the whole lot we've got that you want to start with. Start small, get a few running, and then slowly scale up.
Brilliant. Okay, and then we've got a question come in from Steve regarding, I believe this is more on the integration side of things. In terms of the WhatsApp integration, is that sort of a business WhatsApp account, or is that a personal? How does that work? Is that ready to go at this stage?
So WhatsApp will not be ready May 4, which is when we go live, but it should be ready a couple of weeks after that. The exact fundamentals behind it, I don't think I can comment on whether it's business or personal, exactly how that works, but it comes from a generic number. It doesn't come from your own content, so it's not coming from your recruiter's details. I'm very, very sure of that. Outside of that, the theory behind it is exactly the same as text message.
Awesome. Okay, and then just another one. I think in terms of just how this whole system, this is a completely separate system outside of JobAdder. So Jamie's just asked how this actually functions, just as is it an add-in? How does it go alongside JobAdder?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. So again, coming back to the simplicity point that I'm trying to hammer home, we want to keep recruiters in JobAdder. As a user, there's nothing worse than having to constantly navigate to 200 different platforms. So what we've done is we've created a Chrome extension that is obviously loaded in Google Chrome. So when you've got JobAdder open, the Google Chrome will pop up and it will show the profile you're actually in. So if I were in your profile, Alex, profile on JobAdder, profile on Roy AI would show up on the Chrome extension. That would show your Roy AI score. And then it gives you the opportunity to click there and load Roy AI in the separate system. That you have to go to the separate system at some stage, but you can get that early stage insights. As we develop it, we're putting more into the Chrome extension, so there's more information there, but at the moment it's just the activity score.
Brilliant. Okay, we've had a few more questions come through, but we'll get to them at a later stage. Chris and myself will reach out, and we have our contact details on the page. So if there's anything else you guys want to ask, feel free to reach out to myself and Chris after this webinar. We'll be sharing the slides and recordings with you guys all shortly, but just really appreciate Chris coming onto the webinar. I think it's been really informative. I think even the great thing about these webinars is that even if what you're thinking right now, it always spurs like 20 different ideas that come around and you go, listen, I've got this right now, but it's really kind of spurred some other ideas for a later part. So appreciate you coming on board.
No, thanks. You've definitely helped. I'm going to scribble down some of these new automations you've mentioned and get writing them and documenting them so that everyone can use them.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks guys for attending today.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it.